All right, so next up is Joe McCray and Chris Gates, and I don't really have to introduce them, so there you go.
All right, let's do it. All right, so I'm the black guy, in case any of you guys hadn't picked up on that.
I don't believe you.
For those of you who cannot pick up on that, that's me.
We've taken over, bitches.
So the industry has now changed. There's officially like 4 of us in the entire industry. So it's doing good, man. It's doing good. We're all here. So it's looking good, guys. And then Chris.
He's the white guy.
The white guy? Short white guy.
The short white guy.
Fat white guy. So that's really narrowed it down.
That doesn't like differentiate.
So we gave this talk in Germany, and so I put all that up there to flex because I don't think anybody knew who we were. So
no, not really.
Yeah, so I was like, oh, I'm badass. Fucking check it out, and that's my badass slide.
Awesome. Okay, guys. So the whole premise of the talk is to talk about where we've been and where we think we're going in the IT security industry. And traditionally, we've had what we call this IA triad, right? So assets, threats, and vulnerabilities. And what I would like to explain to customers always is I would say, okay, I want you to imagine this lovely place called downtown Baltimore. There's this great part of it called North Ave. So if any of you have seen that TV show, The Wire, that's kind of where North Ave is. So you would tell the customer, listen, you've got your car and you want to get yourself a chicken box, you want to get some hot wings, you want to get yourself, a half and half, and this is real, right? It's not an Arnold Palmer. A half and half is lemonade and iced tea. Now, this is the real deal, right? So you are on a Friday night at 11:30 in your 7 Series Beamer with the tinted windows. This is the what, guys? This is your asset. So now what you want to do is you want to pull in, you want to say, hey, I'm going to get that chicken box, I want to get the half and half, fries, extra ketchup, and let's get real, right? Now, the vulnerability is you decide that you're going to get out and run in without locking your car, because you're just going to go fast, right?
And on the wire, it doesn't matter.
And on the wire, it doesn't matter, right? So Nug Nug and Pojo hitting the blunt, looking at your car, that is the threat.
Wow.
Everybody with me?
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got that. We've got that, right? Asset times vulnerability times threat equals risk, or the likelihood that you will get owned, right? Okay, so we've got risk management, right? But the problem with it is it's a vulnerability-driven industry. So the focus of traditional IT security has been to remove vulnerabilities from the environment. So what's changed? We've learned over the years that that doesn't fix the underlying problems. CG gave a talk, year before last, Loaded Pwn, where he really kind of brought it together like, look, if I couple these low vulnerabilities, they can correlate to mediums and in often cases highs. We've also seen too many organizations focus on the number of highs in the environment instead of what an attacker can do after utilizing the high, right? And then the real thing that's really kind of taken this stone to a glass house is a vulnerability isn't required anymore to get into the network. So if you've based your entire information assurance program around remediating vulnerabilities, when a vulnerability isn't required to get into the network, it ain't looking good for the home team.
So some of the more forward-leaning companies are doing data-driven, where we say, hey, this is kind of what's important to me. This is my secret sauce. Can you go after that and get that? So that's becoming a bit more prevalent. It's been called goal-oriented pen testing, data-driven things. What we see it's rare is can you detect that activity along the way? We want to see, typically it's after the fact. You get told, oh, I saw you. I would have stopped you on fucking day one. But you didn't really talk about that initially. But so that's data-driven.
Okay, so how are we looking at changing the industry? And from the types of tests that my company's been doing and where CG Works, Lars, we've been doing is we've been seeing that too much of the industry has been focusing on minimizing the presence of vulnerabilities. And what we're saying is, why don't we focus on the tactics and techniques that attackers actually use? Vulnerabilities are transient. Every day that you patch vulnerabilities, there's going to be more vulnerabilities in the environment. But A hacker who gains access to a system, data mines and filters the system, moves laterally and exfiltrates data from the network, those things don't change as rapidly as the exploits do. So you should focus on your ability to detect and respond to hacker activity, and we should rate that. This is what we're calling capability-driven security assessments. So we break penetration testing down into these areas: targeting, information gathering, initial entry, post-exploitation, lateral movement, data exfiltration, and we evaluate the customer in these specific areas instead of high, medium, low.
Kind of works like this. So we do prep work. This is basically targeting. Who do I want to go after? What do they have? We do passive intel, so you don't see what I'm doing, ideally. Moving to active intel, targeting, and then exploitation. And the process repeats itself as you get in. So, yeah.
Have you considered mapping this process? Like, does this process ever derive off the kill chain? It's very similar to the kill chain model.
Very similar.
Okay.
Very similar.
Next. So how it works, most of you guys have probably seen this. Initial infiltration, you get in one way or the other, get a foothold. The big thing here is the exfiltration piece. So anybody that works APT or does that sort of stuff, they're very well versed in that, but most of us don't pen test that. Very rare does a client say, well, I want you to get my critical data or a fictional piece of critical data and get that out of my network. And let me see if I can see you doing that along the way. Does anybody's clients ask for that or do that?
Very, very rarely.
Right. So that was 3 out of the whole room, and rare. Rare for us as well that it's a test of like, I really want you to go, full Monty on it and try to get it, and I want to catch you along the way. So.
Okay, so what we started doing is talking to the customer about the skill level and level of sophistication in the attacks that you should be trying to defend against. So if you're trying to deal with, that level 1 where you're just trying to get patch management, that's going to be that script kiddie, quote unquote, right? A person who just blindly runs tools. Your next level up in sophistication is basically like a sysadmin. Person with a little bit of system administration background, some Windows, some Linux, some familiarity with programming. Maybe you can change a script around type thing. But he's not necessarily writing his own tools. He's not necessarily writing his own exploits. The next level of sophistication is that organized crime or hacker for hire. So this is a person who, this is his day job. This is it. This is how he puts food on the table. So his tools are a little bit more refined. His methods are a little bit more refined. He's pretty comfortable with this. The fourth is going to be that state-sponsored hacker. And we really try to make sure that the customer understands between levels 3 and 4, it's not necessarily a huge gap, a huge distance in skill. Often what it is it's time and resources. This level 4 attacker is funded by somebody who is affording him the time to just focus on a particular target or set of targets and has nice purse strings.
So who has what I want? If I make a widget, I'm usually going to advertise that I make a widget, and my secret sauce is coming out new widget comes out for 2013 next month. So press releases, Twitter, all the words out there. Who has what I want? Then I want to see who has access to it. So LinkedIn. Rob and I gave a talk at DerbyCon. We talked about doing some LinkedIn magic to find people, get access. Everyone who's anyone's on LinkedIn now. And then typically probably not allowed for most engagements to start getting to know people on Twitter and Facebook, but some of our bigger engagements where we have more time and more scope, it's, hey, I'm going to create a user. I'm going to be an employee at that company. I'm going to start picking people, and I went to that high school and that college of maybe 1 or 2 people that I've picked out as my likely targets. So I friend them on Facebook. We start having a relationship. We get them on Twitter. We start talking on Twitter. Just basically I want to be able to send them something and have them open it or look at it, and I get into that trusted web.
Okay, so that next phase, so that phase 1 was that targeting and information gathering. Phase 2 is that initial entry. So an example of that script kiddie would be someone who runs an exploit that's less than a year old. Maybe it's a little bit of an older Internet Explorer exploit, something like that, a little bit of an older Java exploit. And then as we kind of go up in level of sophistication, someone who's like a sysadmin type skill level, he has an understanding of how networks are commonly configured, what defensive mechanisms are commonly in place. He's going to be the type of person who's like, oh, well, right now Java is the hot thing, and I know at XYZ type of company, they have really bad configuration management, really bad patch management. There's a good chance that, Java vulnerability that's, less than 3 months old will work. So, you're going to be a little bit more skilled of an attacker to know that type of stuff. And then it keeps going up in terms of sophistication, where they create mock websites and try to coerce users into entering their credentials. And then that next level up is going to be things like file format type bugs, user assist type payloads, where there's no actual exploit. We're just trying to coerce the user into running something. And then we may have like public code that's been modified. A typical exploit that's been modified, either the exploit payload itself or the actual delivery mechanism of the exploit. Instead of like a JavaScript loader, you might change it to something else to actually load your exploit. Those will be the types of things that you're going to see in a much more skilled attacker. Chris has actually run into some really interesting pieces about phone calls.
Yeah, so we've done some engagements where I got just completely shut down on phishing. Like, they've got a great program. They've very mature. They've got things looking at links that come in emails. They've got users are trained. Anything even remotely weird, they're sending that off to the help desk. But what they weren't so well trained on was just picking up, getting on Skype and calling these people as Chris from the help desk. The users were very untrained on what the help desk would ask from them or ask them to do. So where I got completely shut down like 3 attempts in a row for a phish, I called them and was like, hey, I need you to go to the site and update your Java. No problem. So it's important to include phone pretexting and phone phishing and things into that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely agree. All right, so this is just some syntax to kind of give you an idea of things that you could be doing on initial entry. It doesn't mean that this is exactly what you have to use, but again, just to give you an idea. So what you're going to see right here is us using putty.exe as a template or stub that we're going to use for building a Metasploit payload. We're going to use an encoder for it, and then we're going to embed that into a PDF file. We're going to call the PDF file the flu shot schedule. So taking from what's going on in the news, the flu has been one of the worst flu strands in several years. These are the kinds of things that you want to capitalize on. Chris had a recent engagement where he was able to capitalize on some really interesting, like current events.
So, example of the user assist. So, hey, update your Java page. It pops up and you run it. Get them to run it. Seen that before?
I've seen that a couple times.
Sending file formats. So, is something like this good enough to get into your network? I worked for RSA, right? So,
details.
So the idea being, the exploit is contained inside of the attachment, and then credential phishing, I think, is the next one. So this is one I ran actually in January because everyone was waiting for their W-2s. It was kind of mean. I messed them up pretty bad, but the idea was, hey, the email basically said, hey, we've got single sign-on. Just enter your network creds. Log in and you'll get your W-2, and everyone was all over it because it was before the end of the month and everyone wanted it really bad. Yeah.
Did you yank that from somewhere legitimately, or did you actually?
I searched for W-2 download, and that was like the first site that came up, so I just mirrored it.
Got it.
What'd you do with them after they logged in?
Oh, it went. Credentials. Well, besides logging the credentials, it said something went wrong. Try again later.
Okay.
So it just basically with 302.
Yeah, computers.
It was 302 to an HTML page. It just said server's broken. Try again in a few minutes.
Okay. All right. So that next piece, after categorizing the skill level and level of sophistication for the attacker, is post-exploitation levels. So traditional penetration testing has been focused primarily around level 1, gaining access, which I don't feel has any real business value. If all I'm doing in a penetration test is to say, okay, I run my vulnerability scanner, Nessus, Qualys, Retina, whatever, and I identify these vulnerabilities, and I now take my exploit framework and exploit those vulnerabilities, all you're doing is proving that the vulnerability scanner is right. So for the amount of money that they pay us in a penetration test, they can buy better vulnerability scanning solutions, patch management solutions. in my opinion, penetration testing, if all you're doing is vulnerability validation, has absolutely no business value.
It gets hard to assign any sort of risk to those assets as well, right? So if I can own that, it doesn't mean a damn thing. It's really a low risk, but it might still be a high in the vulnerability scanner where you really need to pen test to understand what's the impact of this vulnerability.
Huge. Go ahead.
I agree with what you're saying, but you know there are still people out there when you show them vulnerability scan, they say, so what? And I agree with what you're saying that, proving that the so what is so is still a so what, but some people still need that, like, oh wait, this vulnerability scan really can screw me up, then they get scared over that. Now, like you said, I agree with what you're saying, but still there are some people who need that proof.
But it's about the maturity of the IA program. If you've been doing patch management, change management, configuration management for a long time, and we've got security metrics in place where we've been deploying all these things, and we've been categorizing that when we deploy XYZ security product, number of hours without incident goes down, goes up, and number of spam emails collected this week is 5 more than last week, and all that kind of stuff, like typical organizations. That's when it's time. Go ahead, man.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No.
My question is, why are we still scaring people?
Yeah.
Why do we need to still scare people? So what this is doing is not scaring them. It's showing them the real issues, right? I don't need to do a vulnerability scan and then prove the vulnerability scan works to scare them. I need to show them what they're actually important.
But sometimes, like, they don't understand, or they refuse to understand, or they refuse to, you're right, it's the maturity of the organization and the maturity of the executives at the organization realizing the danger.
Right, and we're going to get to that.
That's a completely other talk, though.
And there's
them paying you and them not listening to your advice is really another issue than you trying to give them actionable risk issues and what's the matter, right?
Right.
I agree totally.
Yeah, and there's some other pieces to that we're going to touch on in a little bit, and it boils down to trust. The more trust that this customer has in you, in other words, you've been pen testing and it started with just this small web app, and then it kind of transitioned to a network test, and then it kind of transitioned to a larger test that incorporated wireless and some physical and a little bit of social, and then the following year it kind of turned into some AD bypass and this type of thing. That's how you get to these things. No customer hires you, sight unseen, to do a full scope red team engagement. It takes building trust. So, I think what all of us are saying really kind of interrelates to that customer having trust in us that we're going to give them actionable data, like what he was saying.
It's maturity too, because if they can't do that first part, they can't do vulnerability management, then they need to focus on that first.
Sure.
This whole talk is about environments that have surpassed that or matured beyond that. So that's important to remember too. Like, if they don't do that, they need to focus on that, and you need to help them with that. Step one. We're kind of talking an environment that's already has a good vulnerability management program. That's how do we improve them further from there?
So, like I said, the first level is access, just saying, hey, I can get on this box. The second level is leveraged access. So where can an attacker go after gaining access to this system? I can see these other systems. I can see that this is where data is probably going to house on this other subnet in this other domain. And then the next one is keys to the kingdom. So, for example, I had a customer who said, hey, Joe, I want to see if you can tell me how much money my boss makes. Hey, Joe, I want to see if you can give me the social security numbers of these 2 individual investors because their investment accounts total over $100 million each, right? These are things where a customer is saying, I want to see if you can get to this. And then the last thing is long-term command and control, where a customer is saying, okay, what I want to see is, can you stay persistent, maintain access in my network over a prolonged period of time and then exfil data out of it? And I want to test my incident response capability, test my network monitoring capability. Again, these are the types of things that you're going to need a mature organization. These are mature organizations type questions, in my opinion.
Agree.
All right, man. So we have fail or what? Epic fail? All right, so just to give you some examples of post-exploitation type things, and then from a defensive defensive perspective. If someone were doing simple privilege escalation, UAC bypass, at command, interpreter get system, these types of things in your environment, do you have the ability to detect it? Okay. Other things, what if someone is pilfering a local file system or network file system? Do you have the ability to detect it? What about simple persistence? Do you have the ability to detect registry modification throughout your network? I've got 1,000 machines, I've got 3,000 machines, 10,000 machines. 3% of the machines in the environment have a registry change. Would you know that? Right? The same set of credentials touch 400 machines in this environment today. Would you know that? Question?
You have a question from IRC.
Sure.
It says, how often are you actually in an engagement where you can set up a long-term CNC server for data exfiltration? All I see are a large amount of clients wanting stuff done within a week, sometimes two. Even with customers trusting you, hardly see any clients that want long-term engagements.
I can answer that. For Lars, we do several a year, for sure.
Nowhere near the volume like they're doing at Lars. Maybe a couple a year, realistically. It's the type of thing that happens when you've been with a customer for several years. They've had to build that trust.
All right. I'll let you know if there's a follow-up.
Oh,
Thank
cool. And then again, advanced persistence. This is the custom backdoors and those type of things. Can you detect that? Too long, we've been focused on vulnerabilities and the ability to pop a box and, am I patching something? But these are things that hackers do when they get in your environment. And, depth of compromise, I know when I've responded to things, depth of compromise has always been a tough thing to actually figure out because they didn't have the resources in place.
Yeah, you tend to go invisible once you're inside, usually, unless you have something up pretty good. So, examples of that, laterally moving. So once you're on a box and you have creds, can I start moving around via net commands, copy things around? So that's just some examples of tools that can do that for you. So your sysinternal stuff that's built into your custom backdoor, your Joeware stuff. Same thing, so examples. So do you see that? So I think that most places, net using around and copying files via net use is not common. Agree? I do it all the time, but I don't think most administrators will actually net use a box and copy. So do you have anything in place to see these things getting copied around? There's binaries getting copied around tip locations or startup locations. Can you see that stuff? Does PS executing around, does that work? Do you have hips or HIDs that's making that not work or alert? Same thing, do you see if we push something out via an Alturas update or SMS, what was the other example? OpenDLP or something. If we start pushing things around, does anything see that? That's our data exfil. Some people in the room are super versed in that, but for those of you that aren't, it's basically taking that data and getting it out of the network and into my space. So kind of an order of complexity would be exfilling any port protocol. So does raw TCP out 31337 work in the network? Moving up from there would be exfilling data out protocols that are correctly formed. So unencrypted HTTP DNS, moving on to SSL or any sort of encrypted comms, and then proxy aware type exfils. And so once we have that, so big things go better into small packages when we want to get rid of them. So RAR is awesome because RAR will break big files into little pieces for you. You can encrypt them. You can password protect those. So you take a big file that you want, move it to my exfil server, gets broken into little pieces and password encrypted, and then I can push those out slowly, and it's not abnormal, right? So workstations typically have lots of space, high bandwidth, and it wouldn't be abnormal for these guys to be on Facebook, on Twitter, or doing high volumes of traffic, where if your Oracle box or your DBA's box or servers, that would be abnormal, where they may even have different proxy policies. If we ran into that recently where the servers basically can't go anywhere on the web, but the workstation is pretty wide open. So I want to get that info from a server to a workstation and pull it out. Fancy diagram kind of looks like that. So basically I'm sitting on some server, get data from the these guys are pretty slick, so I can only talk to the database via the DBA's workstation. But he's got the same local admin as everybody else. So pull the data out, pull it off to my box to the exfil workstation, then out to the interweb. I think most of you guys have seen that.
Mm-hmm.
That's super lead hacker.
No, this is the super lead hacker. So I've set up VLANs, and clients can't talk to the admin VLAN. I can only talk to servers, but you don't patch your servers, so I'll just own a server and get into the admin VLAN that way. I've only seen that like twice in my life. It's pretty rare too. Mm-hmm. What usually happens is you fish the guy, there's a share drive that everything is in, you just take it, then and you're done in like 20 minutes. That's the average assessment.
90% of assessments are that.
That's pretty much, we did a financial where their crown jewels were their investor info, and that was on a share drive that was open to everyone, and it's mapped to everyone in the organization. So one fish, and what they considered the most important thing that they had of telling people what to invest in, everyone had access to it. So it was pretty eye-opening for them to be like, oh, crap, that's not good.
Okay, so, reiterating, right? Today's information assurance programs have primarily been comprised of vulnerability management, patch management, user awareness training, and then documentation of the first two. I mean, that is your typical information assurance program. But like I said, if vulnerabilities are transient, every day you patch, every day there's more to patch. And if the attacker isn't relying on the presence of vulnerabilities, you're going to be in a world of hurt. So this is kind of where we've been taking this. So instead of saying things like, well, hey, Mr. Customer, you have 600 highs, 1,200 mediums, 5,000 lows, we're starting to say things like, okay, listen, Mr. Customer, you're right now able to detect and respond to a level 3 attack, basically organized crime. So you're a financial services firm. This is the type of attacker that you should be able to detect and respond to. Well, hold on, Mr. Customer, you're a government entity, high target for advanced persistent threat. You're a defense contractor, high target for advanced persistent threat. You're able to respond to that level 3 organized crime. You're not able to respond to the tactics and techniques of that state-sponsored attacker. So this is kind of where we're trying to take it. Okay? Realizing that nothing will ever stop an attacker. The big thing in the industry now is changing, where people are starting to say terms like expect breach. Expect breach, period. Right? So now we're having to look at like, okay, if I need to expect breach, I need to start realizing like, okay, how difficult is difficult? If I know that we're going to get owned, my only goal is to make it more difficult to get owned so that, the attacker will have to work harder, and hopefully I'll see him while he's working harder. He'll get frustrated and go somewhere else, right? So at what point would an attacker move on to another vector? Or at what point does the attacker say, hey, this is too difficult to break into?
How do you start low enough, though? If you're giving a pen test, how do you start so simply that you end up at script kiddie if what you're standardly doing is going to be at a level 2 or a level 3? If your phishing email, how do you make your phishing email so obvious that
look in your spam folder. Look in your spam folder.
So what if that works?
So that's what you need to talk to your customer about. Because most awareness teams have that obvious feature where look at the misspelling, hover over the lid, just go somewhere it's not open. And that's training.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just saying if maybe they're focusing on stopping web attacks.
Sure.
They do a great job of doing that, but they're bad at phishing emails. It's really hard to put that in one category and say.
Actually, if you just hold on like 2 more slides, 3 more slides. Actually, we do have a thing for showing that. So, okay, so finishing up this saying, at what point in all of this above will an organization detect this activity and respond to it? So here's an example of engagement we were on in May. So a few months ago, we were out at this customer. It's a financial services firm. It's a really large financial services firm, right? And you can see that their, what was this? Forefront? Is this Forefront? It was Forefront, right? Yeah. So Forefront detected us, right? Now, the boxes, they were a completely Windows 7 environment. So Server 2008, all Windows 7. They had 2 XP workstations in the entire network, right? So everything had HIPs. They had a proxy. They had all the cool things. They even paid for a MSSP. So great environment, right? Now, everything was running, what was it, IE, was it IE9?
IE8.
It was IE8, right? Okay, so now here we are, we can own them with all these browser bugs, Java stuff, all these things worked. But what was saving them? Endpoint protection, right? So even though they had good regular patch management, the third-party patch management wasn't very good, but they were making up for it because endpoint protection was saving them. So when we started rating the customer, we started telling the customer, like, okay, for us to get by your endpoint protection, it took us building this custom EXE that we did a third-party compiler with, using like a MainGW compiler. We did all this crazy encoding and modifying it. We embedded it in a spreadsheet, and that's how we got this thing to work. And it basically took us a full man day, 8 hours to do this. But then getting by your proxy and your MSSP was trivial because you don't install certificates for the proxy on everybody's workstation. So encrypted traffic leaves the network pretty easily. So the one thing that was difficult to bypass was this endpoint protection, but everything else was trivial. So we're finding that customers are liking this kind of information. If they're a high security environment, they already have Nessus. They don't really want us to come in there and tell them stuff they already know. They want to know, like, okay, well, we just bought X, and we're really curious how that works with Y, this other product that we bought. And we use a managed security service provider. We want to know how well that's working. Are they detecting you? Are we detecting you? Is our log correlation working? These are the types of questions that we're starting to be asked more. And I was having a conversation with Gall in the hallway a little while ago, and I was saying that you've got, not quite to the point of buyer's remorse, but a weary customer. In other words, every year he's bought the brand new flashy blinkety thing. Okay, I needed to buy this, and then that year, okay, man, I got to buy this, and then the very next year, I got to buy this. And, when you finally get a person in there who's, I wouldn't even call us like super elite hackers by any freaking stretch of the imagination, but, we know what we're doing, and then we get past it, you're having to kind of start to tell the customer, like, okay, well, look, man, you can only tell a person that their baby is ugly for so damn long, right? You keep spending all this damn money and your baby's still ugly. That kind of Joan Rivers thing. You keep having plastic surgery, but dude, it's just not. You kind of feel what I'm getting at. So we're having to put it into a context that makes sense for the customer and saying, okay, here's where you're at, and for the type of organization you are, this makes sense what you're doing. Or for the type of organization that you are, I think you need to kind of step it up a little bit. So based on these things, this is where we think you're most likely going to be attacked. So we think that your external stuff is strong. They're probably going to have to come after you via wireless. We think that your, the social engineering stuff that we did worked fairly well. This is probably going to be the vector that the attacker is going to have to use. And we kind of build them an attack path where we say, okay, here's the most logical way that an attacker is going to go after you. So this is the thing that I think you need to be working on for next year. And that's really kind of leads up to the stuff that Chris is doing.
So once you think an organization can defend against a level 2 type level, it's time to consider red teaming.
Oh, my bad, dude. Man, I'm putting the thing down. Dude, my bad.
Put a whole bunch of words there. Basically, red teaming is finding the most, not most obvious, but the most practical path to what you want, right? So real-world attacks, so not doing what a lot of people like to force your hand and scope you into a corner, basically throwing all the cards on the table and just saying, go get it, and letting the attacker work his way through the most probable course of action, most probable attack path to get that stuff done. Mm-hmm. What we run into is a lot of places typically test in stovepiped environments, so quarter 1 I'll do NetPen, quarter 2 we'll do Wi-Fi or physical, then we'll do maybe a phishing exercise, but we don't really get into what happens when those get done. So when I talk electronic pen testing, network pen, Wi-Fi, web app, phishing. Social would be all the in-person stuff, so conversations either on the phone or in person, talking to the guard, trying to get in, tailgating, that sort of thing. And then physical, pure physical, so lock picking, shove knives, the magic number 7 to get in the door, tailgating in, straight defeating physical controls, jumping fences. And then we also lump the Proxmark RFID attacks into that as well, because you've got to be next to someone to touch to get that. You've got to have close proximity. So what we run into for a lot of like our normal standard engagements is these. If you do those stovepipe, they can be scoped to where the client will pass those engagements, even though if you kind of take both of those together and see where one vulnerability affects the other, they would fail. But because they're kind of scoping you into a corner and basically predicting their own outcome, you don't win, and they win. They think they win, but they don't. So basically, they're giving a false insecurity of that they're secure because I'm only allowing you to test can you walk through the building, not whether other avenues would facilitate you getting into my building. Yeah.
What kind of when you do these types of engagements, what's the client, the employee awareness rate? How many people are aware that this is happening? Are people going to tackle you when you go in?
So the question was employee awareness of the test. Generally pretty low. We try to keep it within a small group.
C-levels?
Yeah, VP, C-level guys, the ones that are signed the get out of jail card. They know what's going on. At this level, you've got a pretty mature program, and you want to actually see how these things are working, right? So is the guard force that I'm paying doing their job? Sure. Do I have a lack in policy of the way when someone shows up and they don't have their badge? Is my policy correctly implemented that they're checking systems to make sure these people are legitimate employees, or how does that work? Or can I just say, yeah, I don't have a badge, and they're like, here you go, see ya, right? When you're talking red teaming, you really want to see how all these blinky pieces are working, but how all the policies are working together, and are you getting the outcome that you should? But that's kind of the idea.
Okay, thank you.
And so we talk convergence, and I kind of mentioned that. It's basically where those circles start coming together and saying where one vulnerability can give me access or make my job easier for another piece of that. Slide. Kind of looks like this. So the big ones are where your electronic and physical come together. So attacks on physical systems. So typically your badge systems in most places are networked. All the RFID readers are networked. So can via electronic compromise, can I use that because those systems are networked? Can I facilitate me getting into a facility because I have access to that? Same thing for social and physical. Basically, that's tailgating and putting on your polo of the day and doing your business to get in. And then same thing for electronic and social. Basically phishing, but then you can do blackmail and some other things. So examples, probably one of the bigger ones is electronic, social to physical. So places got pretty good physical security, which a lot of places have been doing physical longer. So they're better at that. So the idea is we get into the company via phishing attack, do your standard post-exploitation stuff where we escalate to domain admin, set up shop, we've gotten keys to the kingdom, we've done all the data stuff, and now we want to see if we can use that access to actually facilitate like entry to the data center, usually what they're after. Can you get to my data center even though you already own all the data? So typically you'll want to identify the badge system, so Linnell, Secure, some of the examples. Slide. Once you identify the badge system and get access, you want to add a profile. And so there's some challenges sometimes figuring out how to properly add a profile in the system, but basically add a profile or change an existing profile. So in this case, we found Eric Smith that worked at the place. Slide. We substituted our Eric Smith for him, which was pretty awesome. Slide. We had Eric actually show up to the facility and say, hey, I'm Eric, I don't have my badge, can you give me one? Guard looks him up in the system, gets his picture. He's got a driver's license, right, that says Eric Smith. It's him, he knows the information that's in the system, right? Yeah, my employee ID is 12345, right? Basically get issued a temp badge. A lot of these times with the badge systems, you can upgrade badges. So once a temp badge is enrolled, you can change the access to that badge. So what that picture shows is adding the data center access and the all doorways access to the temporary badge. Right, so we've used electronic access to facilitate physical and getting, because probably we were not going to be able to walk in the door. They were really tight outside. your straight physical was not going to work, tailgating failed, all these other normal physical attacks failed, but the convergence of electronic and physical allowed that to happen. The other one is kind of the reverse of, it's the same guys that were shutting me down on the phishing attacks. Really tight outside, can't get in from physical or for electronic. Phishing failed, phone calls failed, but we were able to get guys to found an unlocked door, or you go into the smoking area, you make a fake badge, whatever. Slide. So examples, awesome fake badges. That takes those work, and those took me about 5 minutes to make. You can do pure physical attacks. So that's Chris Nickerson doing like an under door hook. Has anybody seen those? Yeah. Those are if you do any physical, you need an under door hook. Those things are the money. Slide. So basically, we get into the building one way or the other via pure physical. Then once inside, we'll leave a phone plug for hanging out. So find an empty cube. If the network gets you out on regular, you can go regular. You can pop the 3G stick in and do out of band. Basically, you put the phone plug in, shove some boxes, hide it, roll out, and now you have your electronic access to the network via physical. So how did you test it? We had to give these guys an A+ on the electronic, but when you show how physical leads to now we're on the network, and once you're in, things usually go pretty easily once you're in and have a point. So that's it. Any questions on that?
If you ever pop the physical door and then just set up all alarms, do you usually stay there and be like, yeah, it was us, no big deal, or do you just pull?
I think every engineer would have a different answer to that. Chris and Eric are much better at doing the "hey, I'm supposed to be here" game. I'd probably pee a little and run out.
I've also got the thing of the color thing, so it's a little bad when there's like the alarm and now you're running. Question?
If you're caught tailgating and they report you to the security desk, is it considered a fail if they catch you again if you're going in?
Only if the customer stipulated that. So I've had customers who are like, okay, that's great, we got caught at this building, now let's walk across the street to the next building and try there. Customers who are absolutely wonderful about it. I've had customers who are like, if you get detected at any point of this engagement, the engagement is over. I mean, I've really had that level of extremes. It's going to be, really up to that, whatever that statement of work that you negotiate with that customer.
Yeah, we do a little bit of if somebody gets burned and then they're actually burned. I got caught, but if I come back tomorrow and no one knows, well, we're seeing the gaps in the policy. We're seeing issues there of like his picture didn't get taken and put up everywhere, and everyone's looking for this guy, or the cops didn't get called, or whatever. Right? I'm sorry.
Depends if they talk to each other. They just happened yesterday. Watch out.
Right. But then that's the value, right? So there's a gap in policy of, hey, we caught this guy trying to tailgate in. Did we take his picture? Did we find out who he was? Did we put an alert out that someone tried to tailgate into our facility today? A lot of people think these things just happen, and then it's not until you do a test like this that they find out, wow, that's not doing what I thought it would do. Same thing for like the badge. We did one where we were in one system but not the other system. We just didn't know that we had to be in two systems. It was policy to check both systems, but the guard didn't. Right? So that's super valuable for the client to know that, well, I have a training problem with my guard force that he was not in one system but was in the other system.
When did you discover that? You discovered it in the debrief afterwards, didn't you?
Yes, after.
Okay, I'm scared.
Yeah. We didn't know.
All you knew was you got in, right?
Yeah, we didn't know that there was a whole other system that was like the employee registry, and then there was the badge system, and we didn't get into the employee registry.
Question?
So during your recommendations, how much is it that you have a technical solution on, for lack of a better word, skills solution?
So I know for us, when we rate customers, we always say people, process, technology. So we want to give recommendations in all three areas, because a lot of people love to just throw money at a problem. It's a lot easier to just buy the flashy, blinky thing. Actual organizational change, cultural change is difficult. Okay, go ahead.
How much does previous testing with an organization play into how you rate the factors going forward? So, say you were able to get in the first year with a fairly easy, non-complex attack, and you were able to discover a lot of information about the internals of the organization. Does the next year, when you already know that stuff, does that play into the rating that you're going to give them?
Yes, it did. Yes, it did. Yes, it did. It does a lot, but I can think of a specific case where that burned us. So the engagement that he was on with us, we got our, we got kicked in the ding-ding because we were like, okay, well, we know that this is what they're running. We made all of our phishing and all of our AV bypass stuff geared to what we expected them to be running, and we got our what's handed to us for a good bit before we were able to figure out what was going on.
And follow up on that is, do you give a lower or rating on, or higher rating, whatever rating, if you were able to discover that stuff and coincide with what you're able to gather from OSN?
Yes.
Side?
Yes, yeah. OSINT plays a big part. OSINT plays a big part. But again, we weren't able to detect a lot of those things. And then we got in there and man, good God, we got our butts handed to us. It took us a solid, what, 2 weeks? 2 weeks?
So, yeah, my response to that is we try to avoid that by, one, like ignoring passwords from the previous assessment, trying to put a different engineer on it to try to help some of that and alleviate some of the, oh, you cheated stuff too. But that's how we try to go after that, is ignore it. If we even know if we know what the password, like we did one where we knew what the password was, it was still the same password, but I couldn't get it this time around. So we didn't get near as far as we could because I couldn't show that I could get that password again this time. And so we didn't, even though the password hadn't changed from the previous assessment.
Mm-hmm. Good deal.
Yeah, way in the back.
Yeah, I have a question for
Repeat the question.
Customers that allowed you to do anything with mobile. So basically, if you're doing anything towards red teaming the customer or their clientele that they've engaged with, are you allowed to engage on their mobile devices?
So the question was, do we engage on the mobile devices? I have not. I don't think we have had cause to, although we just haven't had to.
Yeah, the issue that I've run into when the discussion has come up is just the proving that the device is owned by the company. So we've had discussions on, well, will you give us all the MAC addresses of all of the devices so we can know explicitly that this is a device that's owned by your company. And now with BYOD, that's like really, really changing because you've got a scope limitation, right? Just because the customer does work stuff on this device, it's not a device that's owned by the company. So it's really hard. I have not had a customer that was really ready to bridge that gap, and make the go for that. I don't know.
I think it's a great vector, but we haven't done it. Like, I'm pretty sure you could mess some people up real bad because a lot of people connect to Wi-Fi when they get to work from their cell phone.
Yeah. Sure.
I mean, to me, it'd be a great way in if you could own their device, own their device, and then have a backdoor on it. But it's not a lot of toolkits to do that. One,
there's the shim.
just have it. It's slippery, dangerous slope.
Mm-hmm. From my understanding, you guys still doing dumpster diving, document recovery?
Not I.
But
occasionally, not often.
Is it as less lucrative as it used to be?
It probably is still great. I'm just not really willing these days. I'm not even gonna lie to you, man. I'm not. You got something to add to that? We got a couple people, and we've only got like 3 minutes left.
No, I don't have anything to add to that.
Client side. How often do you run into lockdown clients where it makes client-side executions or exploits difficult?
Difficult all the time. Impossible? Never.
So I never use a client-side exploit. I haven't used a client-side. Actually, the one thing I think antivirus is great for is catching client-side exploits as soon as I get in messed with.
So
every time I've tried that, it's not worked because AV has popped it.
So the value of clients locking down permissions on their user systems.
Yes, they should do that.
Very good. How about VDI? Have you run into that? Has that affected your sockets anywhere?
Yes, I've run into it. No significant effect.
The problem with some VDI instances is you own one, you own them all.
That's what I was curious about. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
in any situations where you're set up in the role of a vendor, so say they have an MSS provider or something of that nature, and you're acting on behalf of a company that would be acting in that capacity. So if that vendor was completely owned, you're replicating their state and what that their customer would eventually be impacted by. So, sorry, to clarify, you're acting as a vendor that's doing managed services for that company, and you attack them from that standpoint.
Oh wow, that's like crazy insider threat.
Trusted
partner.
That. Never. The question was like attacking as a trusted partner or MSP, and we haven't done any of that.
Wow.
Please repeat the question.
I did.
Okay. Sorry, IRC went nuts for doing.
Fucking listen.
Hey, streaming sometimes is slow.
Anything else?
So in line with the dumpster diving question, how come Chris looks like a successful pen tester and you look like a successful marketer?
He was teaching earlier.
Oh, give him the Shmoocon.
Oh.
Single married? Single married? I don't know.
Single married is that it?
Hey, have you ever seen Joe's ads for his classes in like the Bahamas and crap? He is a pretty damn good marketer.
Don't get me wrong, Joe does a hell of a job too.
Almost a good comeback. Almost a good comeback. All right. Any other questions, guys?
All right, we'll be next door if you have questions.
Food.